Joining us today, we have Samantha, a product designer here at Canva, who has selected 3 designs from our Design Circle community to have a design makeover today. I will let you introduce yourself. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Jess. I'm Samantha, and I've been working in the design industry for about 7 years now. First off as a graphic designer, and then I transitioned into a product designer where I am at Canva working. And I'm very excited to share with you a few tips on how to improve a design based on the key design principles, which are very great to be mindful of when you're designing anything and literally everything that can be applied to. This first design is a logo design from Key for her newest venture. And what we're looking at here in the Canva editor is the original design by Key, and she has done a very great job in creating a logo for her business called the Housing Market, using the house image to immediately communicate what the business is about visually. Today, we'll be making 3 small improvements to this design based on the key design principles of balance, color contrast, and proportion. So when exploring different options of design, I strongly recommend and cannot recommend enough to make a copy of your design by duplicating the page here, which you can click here as a button, so that you can track and compare the design changes you make. And then you'll be able to see whether if you like those design changes or not by comparing the 2. And the first improvement we're going to make with this duplicated design is focusing on position balance, to be more specific. So balance is the distribution of visual weight of objects or colors, texture, and space. Balance helps the design feel very stable. And when you're designing a logo particularly, having a balanced logo design is really important because it helps to evoke trust and confidence through its stability. If you look around and if you can find any logos around you, usually you would find many logos that are centralized, where the key element is in the center or on the left-hand side beside the text, for these kind of reasons of creating that balance. So today we're going to try both options of placing this visual element of the house in the center and on the left side so that we can compare which works better and then go from there. First, I'm going to select this visual element of the house, which Key has put together. I'm going to select everything and then unselect this text here by pressing Shift. And I'm just going to group this all at once by going Command G or Control G if you're on a PC, so that it's easier to just move things around at once. And right now it's kind of towards the left side. So I'm going to centralize this by putting this in the center, and as well as the text. So that's one way to balance it out. The other way, I'm going to duplicate another page, is to put this on the left-hand side and then make the text beside it. Just to make it fit, I'm going to make this smaller by using the corners. And now you've got another version which has the visual element on the left-hand side. So we can compare. Do I like the central better or the left side better? I think in this case, because the name of the business is fairly long, once you put the visual element on the left-hand side, it becomes very horizontally long. Hence why for its balance, it would be much better to go with the center option. So I'm going to delete this page and use this one instead. Now for the second improvement, once again, I'm going to duplicate this page so that we can track these changes. And this time I'm going to look at color contrast. So contrast refers to the arrangement of opposite elements. And that could be colors or that could be space. It could be many things, but right now we're going to look at the light and the dark colors. So the color contrast of the 2. What you want to make sure is to have enough contrast between the backgrounds and the text so that it's readable. And particularly for logos, they're often used on a small scale. So we want to make sure the name, or especially the business name, is clearly visible even if it's a small size. So what you can do is you can select this and then just scale it down to see how it would look if it's on a very small scale. And often this is important because logos generally gets used on a small scale. If you think about email signature, brochure, many other marketing materials, social media, a lot of the times your logo is not the main image, so it gets quite small. And as you can see here, because of the contrast between the gold color of the writing and the white is not great enough, it is quite hard to read. On the contrary, the dark green against the white is really visible because of the greater contrast. But the important thing here is not the house, but rather you want the name of the business to be visible. So what you're going to do is I'm going to go back by doing Command Z. And what I'm going to try to do is to make this letter more visible and tone down the visual element of the house a little bit down. And it's easy to do this because right now, first of all, for logo designs, it's good to keep it simple. And you don't want to have too many colors, and it's good to have contrasting colors. So usually 2 to 3 would be a good number. And Key's done a really good job of selecting 2 colors here, the gold and the dark green. And these 2 already contrast each other. So you've got a good color palette to work with. But by swapping these 2 colors around, you'll get a greater contrast for the text and then make the visual element a lot more subtle. That way in smaller scales and also overall just any scale, it'll work much better in terms of color contrasting. So I'm going to press the text and then change this to the dark green. And I don't have to look for it because all of your colors that you get used in the document are always at the top here. So I'm going to change this to green. And then I'm going to change this house element to the gold. So right now it's grouped. So I'm going to ungroup this so that I can select the specific element that I need to change the color of. And I can do that by Command Shift G or Control Shift G on PC. So now I can select each of these individual elements. So Key's done a few elements grouped together here so that she can create some of these breakpoints. But let's select the element that actually has the color, so this green. And I'm going to change that to a gold instead, as well as this top element here, which I'm going to select and change to a gold as well. So now the business name, which is what ideally you want to pop out, is much more greater in color contrast with the background, and it becomes the main element of the logo. And if you check the small scale of this, even on small scale, now that text is a lot more visible compared to the gold writing that we had previously. And if you're worried about the overlap of the text, you can change this. Right now, Key's got this white background below. So you can change the height of this so that if you want the H and the gold house to be not overlapping each other, you can do so as well. That's one small trick. It's a hacky way to get your breakpoints between your elements and your text. And then the last improvement we're going to look at is the proportion. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this page again. Proportion refers to the relative size and scale of the various elements. And having a visual balance also helps to achieve a good proportion, which we discussed at the very beginning for our first improvement. And it often helps to approach your design in sections when you think about proportions instead of as a whole. So think of an imaginary layout and imagine there's a grid and you're dividing space. So currently you've got these 3 horizontal sections. So you've got the section at the top with the little roof image. You've got the section in the middle, which is your main text, which is a business name. And then you've got the section at the bottom here, which is the square part of your house. And if you think about it, this square part of the house is the tallest in height, but it's actually the least important part of your logo design. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the height of this bottom section to be more proportional to the top, centralizing the text part of the logo. So I'm going to move this up and then select the little imaginary, the white rectangle so that I can cover that up. And you can now see the top part of this roof, as well as this bottom part of this house, is a lot more proportional in height, and it makes this text in the middle a lot more central as well. And last check again, we're going to group this by going Command G and check the scalability of this. So how it works in small size. If we turn this into a much smaller logo, we can now see that the name is very visible. The key element is still clearly visible. You can still read it. And this house is still recognizable. And now it's a lot more proportional in its dimensions as well, so that it's not taller without being necessarily. I'm going to go back, put that into middle. And now we'll go through what changes we have made and compare the before and after. So starting with what we first had, we had this logo here, which was greatly done by Key. And we first made the small improvement of making the logo look more balanced by centralizing the key visual element of this house. And then secondly, we swapped the colors of the elements to make the text the main element and more readable. And then the last change that we did was we tried to achieve better proportion by reducing the height of this bottom section, which was much taller, but the least important part of the design. So here is the before. And here is the after. So those were the small changes that we've made. Before we move on to the second design, let's go through any questions that came in.
No questions other than some of the shortcuts you were using for grouping. So I think it was Control G for grouping, as well as obviously that little top button in the top bar that people could use.
So yes, Control G for grouping. Otherwise, you also have this button here at the top right-hand corner. So you can ungroup by clicking this. So you've got quite a number of elements here, or you can press it again to group it. But if you want to use a shortcut, it's Control G or Command G for Mac, and then Control Shift G to ungroup, or Command Shift G for Mac. So let's go to the second design. And the second design is from Pfizer, which is also a logo design, but this time it's for a football club. And this logo is very nicely done by Pfizer. And there are only, once again, small improvements to make a better use of a couple of things, which are critical to design principle. So we're going to try to improve in font weight for contrast, proximity, and color simplicity. So as always, let's make a copy of this design so that we can track and compare these design changes. And we are, first of all, going to look at font weight. So font weight is important in many design principles, such as hierarchy, proportion, and contrast. And this logo actually has a very clear hierarchy, already with the trophy as the main visual element. Then the secondary is this text here, which grabs your attention after the main trophy. But the second row of this text, which says football club, is not very visible due to the lack of contrast. And here, there is enough color contrast between the black and the gold, but what is lacking is the font weight. So the thin font of this text, along with its light gold color, makes it quite difficult to read. And it only takes a very, very small change to make this text a lot more visible. And you can simply do that by just making this text bold to improve this. So you can do that by selecting this B button here, which is your bold button. Or for shortcut, you want to do Control B. But a better way to do this is to select the bold style of the selected font. So this font is Open Sans, and usually fonts generally come in a font family. So you've got your thin fonts, you've got your regular fonts, you've got your bold fonts. While you can bold things by pressing the bold, usually every font will have a bold style separately, which are made to work better for the boldness. So if I type Open Sans, you can see all of these Open Sans fonts, which are all a family together. And instead of pressing light, which is usually the thinnest font style, I'm going to press Open Sans Extra Bold. And you can see how it has extra boldness because I've selected the extra bold font. And that is a simple change you can make to make this football club, the text, which was thin and low in color contrast, a lot more visible. Now, next, we're going to look at proximity. So proximity in layout design is how you show relevance between elements. So you bring related elements together. For example, these two texts of Ode 17 and Football Club, you want to put them together because they are related to each other. But what's also important is to balance the proximity of elements. So they need to be close enough to be viewed together, but there also should be enough distance so that they don't look crowded into the one small space. And by separating these two texts and graphics with a balanced proximity, it gives a viewer a breathing space as they read and view the logo design as well. Very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to create more freedom in the proximity and the space by moving this football club text out, centralizing this text here. And now that we have more freedom, we can play with text size and positioning now that it's outside of this ribbon. So feel free to play with the position, font size, and even letter spacing now that you have this freedom. So I can move this left, right, but I'm going to keep it center as it creates balance like we talked about. And I'm also going to increase the font size of this now that we can with more freedom and space so that it's a little more visible. So right now it's 9.1. I'm going to try 12. Or if you want to make it bigger, we can even try 14. but I'm going to go with the middle and stick with maybe 13 because I like the middle of that actually. And you can also choose to change the letter spacing, which you can go here. So letter spacing is the amount of space between each of the alphabet letters. And right now, I think it's a little too wide. So I'm just going to tone it down a little bit to 200. And then the last thing I'm going to do is, because this text here is in capital letters, I'm going to create a similarity repetition to make them look more united together in unity and make this all alphabetic capital letters as well. And you can simply do that by pressing this here, which says uppercase. And if I do that, it automatically turns all of my letters into the uppercase letters. And I'm going to centralize this. And then now that we've got this here, it's a lot more visible, but it also still has its connection because they're still fairly close together. And also you've created more relationship and connections using capital letters as well as the same font as well. And then the last one that we're going to do is, so duplicate a page for another improvement. What we're going to do is we're going to look at color simplicity. So a good logo is always usually very simple and distinctive. And while there's no strict rule, it's ideal to have no more than 3 colors for a simple logo, especially if you're not confident about color combination when using multiple colors or a lot of colors. So if there's any additional color which isn't significant to the overall design, try replacing it with another existing color that you have within your logo or with white. So what we can do here is, if you look at this soccer ball here, we have 2 extra colors of this 2 different grays, and it's not necessary, as in it's not going to be critical even if we remove that color. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace the dark gray with something that is either in this logo already or with white. In this case, because the gold is already used and we don't want to use black here because the background is black, we're going to change that just to simply white. So I'm going to go into this dark gray here, change that to white, and then the other dark gray and change that to white as well. And then another way to simplify color in your logo design is to use the same color for the elements you want to be viewed together. So right now, the logo contains 2 groups of elements, the trophy with the shield border, and then the ribbon with the text. And using the same color helps to make the grouping clearer if you want to, for example, change this shield to a black because it's part of this trophy here, and then this ribbon to a gold, which is part of this text here. And this helps to improve the overall simplicity of the design because you've grouped your sections with colors as well. And it makes it easier to view these similar elements together because they look like they belong to the same group. So we're going to go through the small 3 improvements that we've made. So this was the original design. And we first looked at increasing the font weight to make the text more readable with greater color contrast. And then second, we balanced the proximity of these elements, keeping the related elements close, but not too close to avoid crowded elements. And then we looked at simplifying the use of colors by removing any colors which weren't critical and using same colors for elements of the same group. One small thing I'm going to do is you can see a little bit of this trophy peeking out here. So I'm just going to move the trophy down a little bit. That way you get the nice white space here. So let's compare the before and then the after. So those were the 3 improvements that we have made, which were very small changes just to help the simplicity and the overall unity of the design to bring about better.
We do have some really good questions. So first up, what if a client prefers a design you don't find ideal? For example, if the client prefers in the housing market logo you just did, what if the client prefers the house in the previous logo to be larger than the size you resized it to? Do you go with their preference or do you stick with your guns and explain why they should choose yours?
That's a really good question because sometimes you know what is better, but you can't necessarily make the decision for yourself. What I'd do in that case is I'd show different variations of the designs and then compare like we did today. This is what could be better, and these are the reasons why I've made these changes and why it would work better in the actual real life examples. And if you can showcase your logos in real life examples of where it'd be used and how that looks better in the real life objects, then that's a really good way to convince your client how this could be a better logo design for them to carry out. Your client is a client, and no matter how much convincing you do, if their opinion doesn't change, then you can't have the final say. But I think it's important to communicate why you prefer the other option as a designer with the design perspective, and even just communicate some of the design principles like we talk about today, just so that it's more convincing and it's also not based on your personal preference, but based on key design principles that everybody, all designers, have agreed upon for a very long time. And I think that is a good way to communicate the reasonings of these design changes or better designs, let's say.
And then another question, both Mamta and Amanda are curious to know some more tips around font pairing. So how you pair fonts, any tools in Canva that you can recommend, any search terms that you use when you're searching for fonts. So font tips generally.
I am going to go through font pairing in the last design, but before we do, there are actually good existing text elements in Canva, which you can utilize as well. So if you go into text, so you can see these as well. I think these are called color font combinations in Canva, and these are already matched font pairings that you can use as templates, just like how you use the templates for your actual doc types. You can do so with these fonts as well. Let's add a page. So I'm just going to click to the first one. So this itself is a really good example of a font pairing where you've got a very simple, basic kind of rigid font at the top versus something that is very different. So more handwriting style, and also very flowy. So always in font pairing, you try to use opposite styles that complement each other. And usually it works really easily if you're not sure to go with sans serif and serif fonts. So sans serif fonts are like these ones, where you've got your very clean and bold edges, versus a serif font is the ones with the little, like a flick at the edge, which are called serifs. So if you click into your text, and then if you click into your search box, you also get these filters as well. So you've got your handwriting, corporate, display, headings, paragraph, sans serif, serif. So these are ways to filter your text and view them. And even these ones, you can see how they look different. And look at two different styles, which you think can work together. So for example, the easiest one always is sans serif and a serif font. So if you try to take one font of this one, and then another font of a serif instead, you can see how you've got two different styles of fonts which complement each other for their differences. And that is one easy way to think about font pairing. So try to think of what are two different fonts that I can use, which are different in style and perhaps different in category in terms of serif and sans serif, which I can utilize and put them together as a good combination. That's the basic principles of font pairing.
Okay, amazing. That's it for these designs. Let's move on to the third.
Last but not least, our third design is a book design by Rodrigue for a novel called I Remember You. And this is a great design by Rodrigue with a very interesting illustration. And we'll be making some small improvements on font pairing, actually, for one of them, layout and hierarchy to this design. So let's make a copy by duplicating this page. And the first thing we're going to look at is, in fact, font pairing. So the goal of font pairing, like I said, is to choose fonts. I'd say 2 to 3 at maximum that create contrast in a complementary way. Opposite styles, like I said, can work very well together to create balance. And it also adds a layer of an interesting character to the design. So currently we've got 2 text here, but of the same font style, which is Open Sans, which you can check at the top here. And it's a very simple and a sans serif font with the clean edges without the little flick of the serifs. We can use these, but we'll also try to use opposite styles to create that font pairing here as well. This here is actually an image created by Rodrigue. So I'm just going to replicate this by typing I remember you and then make it similar in font size. Yep. And then similar in color as well. Oh, and if you want to change, so you can select the color, but if you don't particularly like that color or need to make it lighter or darker, if you're going to add a new color, you can actually move this around. And it'll be a color of the same tone, but you can move to make it darker or lighter. So in this case, I'm going to try to match the color that Rodrigue has used. So I'm just going to go with this kind of color here so that I can replace what Rodrigue had. And like we did just previously, we're going to search and filter the font. So I'm going to go and find a different font for this heading. It may be something that is bold like it is now, because I think what Rodrigue tried to communicate with this font as well as the illustration is something that is quite, serious, interesting, heavy, has a little bit of depth. And that's a great style that serif fonts can communicate. So I'm going to go in here and click into this search bar again so that I get these filters. And I'm going to click serif and try out different serif fonts to see if there's anything that kind of communicates that style that this book cover is trying to convey. So this is a good one, but something bold I think would be quite nice. So you can go through these and try them out yourself, because all of these fonts are so great and they're so different. And each of them has a little bit of extra character to slightly convey a little bit of a different message. So go through these. I did find one that I preferred. So I'm going to go with that one. So it was Playfair. So there's a few Playfair ones, Playfair Display, SG, and then black. And I'm going to go with the black because I do think that boldness of this font makes the kind of the heaviness and the depth of this book a little bit stronger. So now that we've selected this font for the main title, let's look at what we could pair this with. So for the author's name, so think of anything here that you see and think of the opposite. So this is a very bold, it's a serif font, it's heavy. So I'm going to go with something that is quite thin, and a sans serif font that's quite light and simple. I'm going to go back here, select sans serif this time. So the opposite of serif fonts. And then try out some fonts here, which are, as you can see, a lot simpler, and they're clean and sharp edges, and something that is not as heavy, I'd say. So I'm going to go with this one called the Garrett. And now we have two very different style of fonts, which are together and can be complemented side by side. And then I'm going to duplicate this page because while this font pairing works quite nicely, the hierarchy is not necessarily at its right position. So hierarchy helps important elements of the design to get viewers' attention. And hierarchy should make the most important information pop over the rest when you first look at this design, which is the title. But it also needs to make sure the other key information has enough hierarchy to be seen. And right now, this author's name is slightly too small for the visual attention that it needs to contrast, but also complement with the main title. So I'm going to increase this font size of author so that it's big enough, but still less of hierarchy than the title. So right now it's 44. So I'm going to try 48, but I want to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to press this plus to increase the font size to 50. And also what you can do is to increase the width of this text, you can change the letter spacing that we previously did as well. So if you go into spacing at the top, right now the letter spacing is 0. So you can increase this to, let's say, as an example, 100, and you can get this nice kind of longer text, which creates a little bit more horizontalness of this text as well. And I'm just going to increase this to 120. So that now this text is bigger and also wider for a greater hierarchy than before. And then last change that we're going to make, so duplicate page for another last improvement. We're going to look at lastly the layout. Like I said, layout, you imagine a grid and how you're dividing space. And currently everything is at the bottom. So you've got your two sections, the top section, which is more of a white space, which is another word for empty spaces. And then you've got the bottom section with the two main texts, which is the title of the book and the author's name. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to try to divide the layout using these elements. So the main element here, which is the title of the book, the I Remember You, can have greater hierarchy and attention with layout. And typical way to do this is to centralize it, so to put it into center. So I'm going to move this to the center. And I want this to be a key thing that grabs your attention. So I'm going to actually increase the font size even more. So maybe even try 160. So just enough to fit, but also not go beyond the width. And you can also change the line spacing. So similar to letter spacing, line spacing is the space between the rows of your text, so between paragraphs and rows. So I'm going to move this up a little bit to 1.5 so that it takes a little more space vertically, vertically as well. And while I said it's important to centralize it and it helps, you don't always have to make it center, because right now we've got this text at the bottom as well. So this space here is a lot smaller than the space at the top. So I'm going to make it look more central, even if it doesn't necessarily mean it's actually in the center. So I'm going to move this up a little bit. And you can also check how much distance you are from the edge of your document by pressing the Option button, which is the Alt button on PC, and then putting your mouse near the edge that you want to measure the distance to. So right now it's 606 pixels. So I'm just going to match it to 600 so that it looks more central while you've got enough space between the title and the author's name as well. So in total, we've made 3 improvements. First, I'm going to go through what we had at the very beginning, and then we changed the font pairing using opposite styles between the title and the author text to add more visual character and a style and balance. And then we looked at hierarchy for important elements, such as the author name, to have increasing hierarchy of the author text with greater font size and letter spacing. And then we looked at layout by dividing and utilizing more space for the main element to gain the attention that it should get. So this is the before. And this is the after. So those were the 3 changes that we made to the designs: font pairing, hierarchy, and layout. Before we wrap up, were there any other questions?
So we do have a question around color contrast. So, hey, Samantha, do you have any tips on how you color contrast in a design? I find this really hard when designing.
That's a good question, because color contrast can be either with your background for readability, or it can be with another element so that it actually just contrasts in terms of like brightness or just how strong it is. In terms of color contrast, if it's for readability things, just think of white or light against dark, or the other way around, so that you make sure that your text or your elements are visible. When it comes to color contrast between 2 elements that you want to complement together, what's a great tip is if you look at coloring wheels, as you can see here, you always want to make sure your colors are complementary if you want to have a nice color contrast as well. And 2 colors that are on the opposite sides of the color wheels are usually very great to put together. So like you can see here, this red and the blue, or purple and the green, this yellow and the blue. These color contrasts usually are very great at complementing each other, and there are enough contrast to work together, as well as having that unity because they are complementary. And you can use this as an example, or if you even type color combinations, you'll get a lot of different contrasting colors that you can utilize as well. But if it's regarding the color contrast in terms of using the background and the element, just think of light versus dark, or dark background with light font or light visual element.
We had some questions earlier about choosing color palettes as well. So I might just get you to scroll up to the top and have a look at one of the other tools available on this. You might have to go back. And there's color palette generators and color palette ideas there as well. So if you are trying to choose a palette for your design, here is a place to get totally inspired with loads of selections. If we go back to that main page, color palette generator, this is pretty cool because you can upload your own photo here and it'll actually pull a color palette out of that photo for you. So you can upload an image, maybe that has something to do with your brand, and it'll actually select a color palette for you, which is pretty cool. Mamta has a question. Could you talk a bit about hierarchy and how to choose which elements to focus on in a design? How do you make that decision?
Regarding hierarchy, I think the main question you can ask yourself is, what do I want my viewer to look at first when they look at my design? That element, which is your main element you want your viewers to look at first, should be either central or should be bigger than others, should be the first thing you see in any way. So to make it pop as much as possible. And usually if you look at your design from a distance, it really helps. So if you look at it from a distance and just close your eye and open and see what is the first thing that you see, that is the one that has the highest hierarchy. And you want to make that big, bold, somewhere in the center or at the top. And usually regarding hierarchy, often people will read from top to bottom and left to right. So things that are in the top or in the main center as a big element gets often the highest hierarchy as well. Also depends on size of the element as well, but usually that helps to gain hierarchy. Do the opposite for the things that you feel are less important and also can be more secondary or complementary to the main elements. So things like football club is definitely not the one that should have the highest hierarchy, because that's not what you want your viewers to look at it first. So you can see that it's smaller in size. It's at the bottom of the design. So all of those small changes that you make will also help to reduce the hierarchy compared to the other ones, such as this big trophy here, which are greater in size and also much bold and dark, so which are going to increase the hierarchy. But the main question always is, what do I want my viewers to look at first? And also, how do I want them to read it? In that order, have your highest hierarchy to your lowest hierarchy of elements.
And I think that wraps it up for questions today.
Thank you, Jess. And also thank you, Key, Faiza, and Rodrigue, who shared their designs today, as well as everyone else who submitted their designs. And I hope you all the best with your next design journey.
Thanks so much. We hope to see you at another Canva Space session very soon.